Hi, everyone, and welcome to Self Training Your Service Dog, answering your common questions and how to get started. If you're wondering whether this is the right place for you, let's see if this sounds like you. Maybe you've spent hours researching online only to feel more confused and you crave a step by step plan but find the abundance of conflicting information overwhelming and or frustrating. You're uncertain about your legal rights and requirements for obtaining a service dog, and you just need help navigating the legal aspects of whether you qualify for a service dog or not. Now, a little disclaimer, I am not a lawyer, but I can share based off of my experience volunteering and working with various nonprofit organizations and just being in the industry in general, how we tend to decipher the ADA. And I apologize if you're in another country. You still will get value from this presentation, but since I am the most familiar with the ADA, which is the law under the United States, I will be sharing that specifically in this presentation. If you feel like you want more information on your rights in the UK or any other country, feel free to send me a chat message. It should be somewhere around this video. And if I get enough requests, I might add another section on deciphering service dog laws for that specific country. Maybe so moving on. So maybe you're certain a service dog could improve your life, but you literally have no idea how to begin. You feel overwhelmed. You just have no idea how to even start. And maybe you have a dog, maybe you don't, but you want to know what the actual path is to training or self-training a service dog. And perhaps if you already have a dog, your dog excels at home but struggles in public settings. So you need that expert guidance to help your dog perform reliably in public, ensuring they can support you effectively outside the home. And last, maybe you just struggle to stay consistent and motivated in your training routine and you just want to know, what you should be working on each day. And of course, it's always much easier to stay on a plan or a training routine when you know exactly what to work on. Before we dive in, though, just let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Lisa. I'm a certified professional dog trainer, and I have over a decade of experience in dog training. But I did start specifically focusing more on service dog training in 2020, just because that's when I started volunteering for various organizations. And as someone who is neurodivergent and lives with chronic anxiety, I just know from personal experience also how much a service dog or a service dog in the home can help with mental health. And I just want to remind you to stay until the end because I do have a free training guide. I will talk a little bit about my courses as well, but regardless of whether you decide to enroll in any courses, I wanted to share a free training guide because I know not everyone wants or can afford a training program right now, but I still wanted to provide you with something to get started. What we're going to cover today is first, we're going to understand what service dogs are and are not. And just so some of this may be review, some of this may be brand new for all of you, but that's why I'm providing you with this overview so you know what to expect. So, as I mentioned, first, we're going to understand what service dogs are and are not. We're going to assess whether a service dog is right specifically for you and your dog based off of the ADA, but also whether it's just right specifically for you because all of us have unique needs. And then three, we're going to talk about how a service dog can help, and we're going to cover some common disability tasks that you can train your dog depending on what your disability is. And then we'll talk about what the 4 phases of self training a service dog are. And then finally, we'll touch on how to begin the self training process. So that is enough of me talking. Let's dive right in and first decipher what service dogs are and are not. So these are the 3 terms that people generally get confused about. So first, there's service dog, second, there's ESA, and third is therapy dog. So let's first dive into what a service dog is. A service dog is specifically trained to assist individuals with disabilities, and they're also granted public access rights under the ADA. they're task trained, meaning just the mere presence of having this dog isn't enough to be a service dog. They have to actually be task trained. And don't worry, we'll talk about some tasks later in the presentation, and they are protected by the ADA. They do have public access rights. There are a few exceptions. For example, I think churches are considered private property, or they're under a different type of, I guess, organization. So a church can say no to a service dog, but most churches are going to be understanding. And then, of course, if your service dog would create a massive disruption to the general day to day operations of a business. So, a specific example of that would be going to a tiger exhibit where the tiger is out in the open and you can go pet a tiger at a zoo. Now, the reason why they don't allow service dogs there and they're legally allowed to say no is because it can stress out the tiger. It can cause them to become aggressive because there's prey inside the room, and it's just not safe for the general public. And what I will say is these exceptions are usually for the better anyway, because it would probably put your dog at risk as well. So you wouldn't want to bring your dog in those situations regardless. Second is ESA. So ESA provides emotional support to individuals with a mental health diagnosis, and they are not task trained. Just the mere presence of them is enough to provide comfort. And they're protected under the Fair Housing Act, and they don't have public access rights. And so the main thing to remember with this is going to help you to make sure that you're not discriminated against when it comes to renting a apartment or a house or any type of housing when you have an ESA, because they're there to support your mental health diagnosis. However, they're not granted public access or any type of privilege outside of just being not discriminated against when seeking housing. The third one is a therapy dog. And this one, people also get confused because the word therapy, but I think of this more as a dog that has a job, not necessarily a dog with public access rights. So a therapy dog provides comfort and support in therapeutic settings like hospitals and schools. They don't necessarily have to be task trained, and they don't have any rights other than having access to their place of work. So typically, you can join a third party organization that helps you connect with hospitals and various settings like that, where you can bring your dog to help other people in stressful environments. A lot of airports have them as well. But if you're looking for a service dog, know that it's going to be the first line, and that's what we're focusing on today. But just to recap, a service dog is task trained, helps individuals with disabilities. An ESA is protected under the Fair Housing Act and helps provide emotional support to individuals and helps them not get discriminated against when seeking housing. And third, a therapy dog provides comfort and support in therapeutic settings like hospitals, schools, airports, etc. One common question I get asked a lot is, can I get a service dog for XYZ? Insert whatever you want here: anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, POTS. Like, I get so many questions just around this. And so I wanted to cover what the ADA says. So essentially, the answer is yes if you are disabled, but that's a very vague term. So let's read this highlighted area where it says an individual with a disability is defined by the ADA as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. The ADA does not specifically name all of the impairments that are covered. So they purposely kind of leave it a little bit vague. And, at the end of the day, there's no list of people with a service dog. You don't have to certify your service dog. Because of HIPAA, that would be a violation of HIPAA to have a list of disabled people with service dogs, right? So there's no registration for it. So technically, yes, you could just slap a service dog vest on your dog and bring them out. However, when you do that, you're putting yourself at legal risk as well as other people at risk if your dog is not up to par with training. Like if they destroy something in the store, you're going to owe a lot of money. Or if they bite a person, or maybe they jump on someone and they knock them over, or even just like if you have a really big dog, just walk by someone like a kid and you know cause injury. So that's where you kind of have to be careful, and you you like, just in case in the future something were to happen, which no matter how perfect your dog is, there's always a chance something could happen. And that's why I recommend having some sort of record that you do have this disability. So, what I mean by that is you could ask your doctor for a note just to have that on file. Businesses cannot legally ask you to see that note, it's just more for legal precautions in the future. And if you do travel outside of the US, a lot of times places could have different laws where they require it. So, it's good to have that kind of ahead of time anyway, because you never know. And then, of course, if you're regularly seeing a therapist and you have a record of some mental impairment, that can help legally protect you as well. But the reason why it's vague is because it's kind of up to you to really decide whether, and of course, you and your medical team, whether it is substantially limiting one or more major life activities. And if you have a record of such impairment, then you do qualify. So, a little bit from the ADA directly. This is a screenshot from the ADA that service dogs or service animals are dogs. They can be any breed and any size of dogs, and they're trained to perform a task directly related to a person's disability. They are not required to be certified or go through a professional training program. They're not required to wear a vest, surprisingly. A lot of people still decide to wear or put one on their dog just because most people are not well educated around the ADA, so it helps less people ask you questions. But you are not required to put on a vest. And third, they are not emotional support or comfort dogs because providing emotional support or comfort is not a task related to a person's disability. I encourage you, if you're in the US, to read through the ada.gov. I included the link where it says source right here. And I encourage you to read through this for more information. But in general, I'm going to say if your diagnosis affects your day to day life and daily activities, and you have a record of that and seeing a doctor for that, yes, you do qualify for a service dog. If you want to double check with your doctor and your medical team to see what they think, that's also a great option. And even better, to legally protect yourself is to get some sort of letter so that you have something on record saying that you do need a service dog. I did want to come back in here. I am recording this at a separate time just to make a clarification note that a doctor's note isn't required under the ADA. I just wanted to clarify that. However, the reason why I strongly recommend it, in the rare case that you do come across any legal issues, whether it's warranted or not, you don't want to last minute be trying to scramble for that. Or if you're in the UK and they require a doctor's note, you don't want to be scrambling for that last minute either. So that's why I just recommend having one up front. And that has caused a little bit of confusion because I've said that in some of my YouTube videos and people are like, it's not required. And no, it's not required. But as a service dog trainer, I do require it with my one-on-one clients before working with them, and most organizations will require one working with them because it just protects them legally. And that's why if you are self-training, you should protect yourself legally as well. And so that's why I wanted to recommend it. Okay, back to the presentation. And then next, people really can't ask you a ton of things. They can ask you 2 questions. Is that a service dog? And what tasks are they trained to perform? Those are the only 2 questions people can ask. And just so you know, you're not required to go through a professional training program, and you're not required to put a vest on your dog. You might be wondering, well, then why does anyone work with a trainer? Why would you spend the money to work with a trainer if it's not required? So, of course I'm biased, and I think everyone, even pet parents, should work with a trainer because there's just so much that people don't realize when it comes to training. However, especially for service dogs, I do think it's important to work with a trainer because 1, we have that expert guidance, we have experience in this industry. 2, behavior management, so we can help you address and correct certain behavioral issues that pop up very often as the dog ages. And we can promote a higher likelihood of success because we can catch those issues early versus waiting until it becomes a bigger issue. The third is consistency. So regular sessions with a trainer ensures consistency in training. 4 is advanced skills. So if you're having trouble teaching a dog a complex task or specialized skills, we can help with that. And then 5, support and resources. So just having that support as well as resources and a community of other dog handlers can be really helpful because it is a longer process to self-train a service dog. And finally, confidence. Working with a trainer boosts your confidence in knowing that an unbiased person believes that your dog is up to par in training, because sometimes it can be hard to really see whether your dog is really trained or not when it's your own dog. And if the ADA is so vague, why does proper training matter? Sorry, I don't know why it says manner. Why does proper training matter? So first, public access issues. Businesses could deny entry if your dog exhibits disruptive behavior despite ADA protections. So let's say your dog is knocking over a bunch of products off the shelves with their tail. Since you are disrupting the business, they could technically ask you to leave. Same with if your dog has an accident in the store, like pee or poop, then they can also ask you to leave. So we want to just make sure that our dogs are trained well before going out in public. And then second is liability issues. As I mentioned earlier, untrained dogs are more likely to cause accidents or injuries, leading to potential legal liability for the owner. Whether you are self-training without professional help or working with a trainer, you want to keep some record, like a training log, so that if something does happen in the future, you have this log of training journals, basically, of what you worked on to really show that this dog really is a service dog and you put in the work to train them. And then third is credibility and trust. Properly trained dogs uphold the credibility of service dogs in public, ensuring continued support and acceptance from the community, the overall community. So we want to respect the general public, right? Just because you could say, I'm disabled and I need this dog, but if enough people get irritated with dogs that are untrained being out in public and dogs that are not well mannered, eventually people could start to try to change the laws around service dogs and make it more strict, or maybe then require certification, which would make service dogs less accessible to people. So basically, like, making sure that your dog is a well representation of the bigger service dog community so that we don't run into issues in the future. I encourage all of you to read through the ADA regardless. However, I wanted to highlight this portion of the ADA on their service animals page. This talks about when a business is allowed to ask you to leave. The ADA does not require covered entities to modify policies, practices, or procedures if it would, quote, fundamentally alter, end quote, the nature of the goods, services, programs, or activities provided to the public, nor does it overrule legitimate safety requirements. If admitting service animals would fundamentally alter the nature of a service or program, service animals may be prohibited. In addition, if a particular service animal is out of control and the handler does not take effective action to control it, or if it is not housebroken, that animal may be excluded. And so, going back to the example with the tiger, that would fundamentally alter the nature of the service because it would make it dangerous for the general public. So, that's why they're allowed to say no service dogs. If you work at a restaurant as a chef, that is a legitimate safety issue for the general public. So that's why chefs cannot bring a service dog. Also, it's not really safe for the service dog. And then another example, like, that's why we want to make sure the dog is not just trained to ADA standards, but above and beyond ADA standards, because out of control is a very vague term, right? Like, one person could think the dog is great, another person could think the dog is out of control. So by going above and beyond what the ADA asks, we can ensure that we have no reason to be kicked out, and we can confidently, let them know and report them if they do kick us out with our service dog. So that is it for this section. If you still have any questions around the ADA, you can let me know in the chat around this video. I would love to hear your questions and help you out. So next, let's talk about assessing whether a service dog or hold on. Next, let's talk about assessing whether self-training a service dog is right for you specifically and your dog. So, a reminder that a service dog is still a dog that has dog needs. Meaning, these are some questions that you can ask, and feel free to take a screenshot of this if you want to actually look through each of these questions. It's important to remember, service dogs are working animals, not just pets. However, they're still going to require what a pet needs, like food, water, etc. And they also require significantly more commitment, training, and responsibility. And you do have the option, of course, of going through an organization. The downside is there's usually very long waiting lists if they're free and they're a nonprofit, or if they're low cost. If you're just buying a already trained service dog privately, it's going to be very, very expensive in the 5-figure range. So that is the downside of the other options. However, they do exist. And for some people, they may have to go that route if you don't have the help, or you're not able to yourself do all of this self training. So you want to think about your lifestyle compatibility. So depending on what your dog's breed is, they're going to have exercise needs, and you're also going to have to think about, are you comfortable bringing a service dog in public? This is one of the biggest things you want to think about, especially for anxiety disorders, is a service dog does attract more attention to you. So is that attention going to hinder you and make your condition worse, versus you don't mind? Like maybe it's annoying, but it's not going to make your condition worse. So that's something to really think about. The second is going to be financial commitment. Just like having any dog, a service dog is a dog. So you're going to have to take them to regular vet visits. You want to feed them a very good food because they're a working dog. And then, of course, do you have the money and the finances for service dog training gear, supplies, etc.? And then, of course, emotional preparedness. Are you ready for the challenges and potential frustrations of training and handling a service dog? And are you able to provide a loving, stable home environment for your dog? Because let's say you have bipolar disorder, and maybe during depressive episodes, you're unable to walk your dog, and you're going to get more frustrated with training. Now, if you have help and assistance, like let's say you have a partner at home that can help, or you have a parent or family member, then that can work great. But if you don't, then that's just something to think about. And then finally, legal considerations, which we talked about in the last section, but just making sure that you are legally disabled under the ADA if you're in the US, or the law in your country, and you're able to train them to those requirements, at least those requirements, if not more. If you don't have a dog yet, it's important to remember that temperament is always going to trump looks. We want to make sure that they have the proper temperament for work. And it does require a specific type of temperament. Being a service dog requires a specific type of temperament because they're going to encounter a lot of new things. So if your dog has an anxiety disorder or is just anxious around new and novel things, that's not going to be a good candidate for a service dog. So here's another area where you can take a screenshot and see whether your dog is appropriate for service dog work if you already have one. So you want to make sure the dog can stay calm, they can focus, they're confident in new situations and around unfamiliar people. They're trainable. They have a gentle nature. You also want to consider your health and physical abilities. So what I mean by that is, are you able, like if you have a high energy dog, are you able to provide that physical exercise for that dog? And then you want to consider also, and you can read through all of this. I'm not going to read through each and every one of these, but I just want to highlight some of those big things. So if your dog, let's say if you need a mobility dog, so someone to help you brace when you feel lightheaded or to help you stand up, you can't use a small dog for that. That would not be good for their joints. We also want to look at their age, because unfortunately dogs do not live as long as us. So if they're already older, it's a consideration. Do you want to train an older dog who maybe can only help you for a few more years when it's already going to take you maybe a year to train them? And then you want to think also about, what are your backup plans if you have a medical emergency? Can anyone take care of your dog? Some other things to look at is how motivated your dog is to train. If you don't have a dog yet, this is perfect because you can go through each of those items and decide whether the dog you are considering kind of meets those criteria. However, Either way, it's important to remember that it's never 100% guaranteed that your dog will make it as a service dog. And this is always a risk you do take, not only with self training, but even working with a trainer or even getting a dog from an organization. Sometimes they just end up not having what it takes, but the chance is a lot higher when self training. I'm not going to lie, I'm going to be honest with you. It's always a lot higher with self training because you may not notice the signs as early. And the thing is, like at an organization, for example, there's a lot of dogs that don't make it. Only 20 to 30% of the dogs make it, but they're only offering the dogs that have made it, right? But a lot of dogs do get washed or quote unquote career changed, which is the nice way of saying failed. But ultimately, it's not a guarantee an individual dog is going to make it. But when you're self training, you're working with one dog. So the chance, that they may not could be higher. But by doing the evaluation, working with a trainer in some capacity, they can let you know whether your dog doesn't have the right temperament or whatnot. One more thing I did want to mention actually is I do think there are also huge pros to self training a service dog over getting one from an organization, because a lot of times the only reason why a service dog from an organization would end up not working out is because of the handler's lack of skills when it comes to training. So they're not able to upkeep that training. So by self training, you are able to ensure that you have this bond with the dog, and because you're learning the skills along the way with your dog, you're not going to come across that. So once they do have that training, you already know that they're going to make it because you've been working with this dog specifically and they're not being moved around. Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about how a service dog can help you and some skills or tasks, I should say, that you can train. So, in general, these are the types of service dog tasks. Now, remember, there's some overlap between each of these, so keep that in mind. But in general, this is how I would categorize tasks. So, first is going to be alert, which is alerting the handler to important sounds, smells, time of day, or emergencies to seek help. Think of alert as before an actual medical event happens. So, an example would be alerting you that you're about to have a seizure, or alerting you that you're about to have a migraine. It's before it happens so that you can make the necessary preparation to keep yourself safe or to support yourself. The next one is scent detection. Scent detection, I would say, is a category of alert, but I separate it just because it has a lot of different items within scent detection, so it's worth breaking that out. But that would be detecting allergens like gluten or shellfish for people with allergies, low blood sugar, or the absence of people in a location. So presence or absence of people in a location could be detecting a certain person's scent. Like if you have an autistic child, they're able to locate that child in a location. Low blood sugar or high blood sugar would be basically alerting you to episodes so that you can take the appropriate precautions, and of course helping you deter or not eat things with certain allergens. Another way a dog can help with scent detection is cortisol alerts as well, which can help with anyone that has any sort of stress or anxiety disorder. So there are a lot of other options as well when it comes to scent detection. The third is going to be physical support. So what I mean by that is providing physical assistance like balance, retrieving items, or navigating safely. So I think of this more as like the mobility category, where maybe you're unable to turn on and off lights, or you're unable to close cupboards or put on shoes. That would be more of that physical or mobility support. And then within that, there's also retrieval. However, retrieve is worth breaking out because there's a lot of reasons why a dog could retrieve. So obviously it could be it for mobility disabilities. So like you are unable to get your keys from the counter. So your dog does that. But it could also help with ADHD, like locating your keys or your phone. For any disability, delivering items like medication or other personal belongings, like a inhaler if you have severe asthma. Next is calming tasks. So this is generally going to be for psychiatric disabilities. So interrupting certain anxiety behaviors. So maybe you bite your nail, so they can help interrupt that. panic, or disruptive behaviors to provide comfort and reassurance. So that would be training deep pressure therapy, training, interrupting certain things. So just keep that in mind. And then response tasks. So I think of response tasks as the opposite of alert. So they're responding to a medical alert, meaning it happens after the event. Another example would be turning on lights to wake up someone during night terrors. So that's what I mean when I say there's some overlap, because turning on a light could be a mobility task, but in this case, it would be a psychiatric disability task. Um, this is just an example of how a dog could help someone with anxiety, autism, ADHD, or PTSD. And of course, a lot of other disabilities as well. So, tactile pressure and stimulation, medication reminders, body blocking, graceful exit is where your dog teaches you to leave an area or pretends they need to use the bathroom so you can leave a social situation. Anyway, you could take a screenshot of this if you like, but these are just some common examples of tasks. I would love to ask, and let me know in the chat, what tasks would you find to be the most helpful for you? And with that being said, let's move on to what are the 4 phases of self-training a service dog. This is the general path to becoming a service dog. So of course, I include puppy or when they're a pet dog. So this is before you begin training or your official service dog training, but you should still be training during this time period. So if they're a puppy, you want to make sure you're socializing them and ensuring they have the best support to successfully become a service dog when they are more mature. But you still want to keep up with all of that puppy training and exposure, positive exposure to various novel stimuli. And then phase 1 is service dog foundation. So this is where you can really evaluate whether your dog has what it takes, making sure you actually want to do this, building that really solid foundation, basic manners, and ensuring you're training that unwavering focus so that your dog can disengage from any distraction, which the number one thing I hear from many people is their dog is unable to focus once they're out in public. And that is a skill. So it's not that people will put it as, my dog can't stop pulling on the leash when they are out in public, or my dog can't look away from a dog, or they can't sit when there's another dog out in public. And I would reframe that to a focus issue versus a not able to sit issue or not able to loose leash walk issue. Because if your dog is able to do it at home, they know the skill. They're just unable to regulate their emotions when there's that specific distraction there. And so by training a really solid focus, that's going to build that very solid foundation for when you move on to your advanced manners. Which, that being said, phase 2 is going to be working on your advanced manners and proofing behaviors, which just means making sure your dog can do sit, for example, or deep pressure therapy in a variety of settings. Dogs are very contextual learners. So if you teach your dog deep pressure therapy at home in the same room, every time, the moment you go outside in public, they're going to be like, I don't know what you want. I thought deep pressure therapy was when we're at home in this specific room and you're sitting in this specific way. So proofing or also generalizing behaviors is once your dog knows a behavior, we want to start practicing in various situations so that your dog knows that this applies no matter where we are and no matter what is happening in the distance. And then phase 3 is going to be disability tasks. Now, even though phase 3 is kind of like on this part of the road, you can always start working on this earlier as well, like at the same time as your basic manners. So just keep that in mind. Especially the beginning phases of disability tasks, if you want to introduce, for example, when we talk about scent detection, the first step of that is teaching your dog the alert. So if you want your alert to be a nose bump or licking your face or putting a paw on your lap, you can at least teach the alert part in the very beginning as well at home. So that way, when you get to phase 3, you are more ready to kind of you're past that beginning stage, I guess is what I want to say. When it comes to more generalizing or working on them out in public, you'll do that later. However, you can kind of work on your disability tasks alongside the other phases. So I just want to let you know that. And then phase 4 is public access. So this is where we go out in public and actually practice in public spaces. And then finally is the service dog. So to further kind of dive into each of these phases to help you better understand, feel free to take a screenshot of this as well. So phase one is your foundation skills. The majority of your phase one is going to be focus training. So whether that's playing the sounds of dogs barking at home and getting your dog to refocus on you, or just generally just teaching your dog focus outside with various distractions, that's going to be the very foundation of your training. Because ultimately, if you can get your dog to focus on you and look at you, then you're going to be able to then ask them to do what you want, right? The issue is most of the time we can't get our dogs to focus. And then the rest of these are more just behavioral manners. So, like sit and down, they should be able to, by the end of this phase, stay for 15 seconds as people approach and say hi, and as you walk 20 plus more feet away until you ask them to come. They should be able to come when called, when 20 feet away, and your dog should be able to loose leash walk. I would say like 10 to 15 feet without pulling, and they should be able to be right next to you as you turn right, left, increase speed, and slow down. Your dog should finally also at the end of this phase be able to handle their paws being touched and tail touched. They don't have to love it, but they shouldn't have any major reaction, and they should be able to refocus after their paws are being touched. If a dog is very anxious, you'll notice once their paws are touched, they won't be able to refocus for that training session. This is just the handling part is to ensure safety. People should generally not touch your service dog. That's considered rude. You can get mad at them for doing that. However, you cannot control the general public always, and we want to ensure that you're legally protected. And so by training your dog to be okay with those various areas touched, then we can just make sure that you're not going to come across any legal issues in the future. Okay, so phase two is where we work on our more advanced skills. So you're still going to work on those like sit, down, etc. They're just going to be a little bit harder. So an example of that would be down. The most common use case of that is going to be while you eat out in public. While you're eating, your dog should be able to lay down under a table, or your dog should be able to lay down under a plain seat in front of you. And so they do need to know the skill of crawl because you're combining that crawling under a narrow space and being able to lay down for a long period of time. This is not going to be a full list necessarily, but it's just taking those items that are basic manners and up leveling them to a more functional skill that you're going to use in your day-to-day life. So body positioning, being able to, for example, adjust their body to make space for others. So if you need to lure them between you and the self-checkout counter so they're not just standing in the middle in the way, that would be body positioning. That's still technically a skill of lay down. It's just in a different context. And of course, switching the direction of their legs. So I like to teach this so that our dog's legs are not blocking an aisle. So you can teach them to switch to another hip when they're laying down so they're not having their legs stick out. And then loose leash walking, of course, advancing that a little bit more to narrow areas, maybe different surfaces, different spaces, so that they're able to learn, how to do this in various environments that you may come across. And then, of course, focusing even more, like ignoring people even when they're trying to say hi or solicit attention from your dog. And then phase three, disability tasks. So as I mentioned, the first part, which is teaching the initial behavior at home, you can definitely continue working on even during phase one. And then number two is going to be pairing with an environmental cue, if you're not sure what that means. So a lot of our disability tasks are in relation to something happening medically, right? So we're not trying to tell them like you need to alert me because I'm having a seizure. The cue is going to be that they sense via scent that you're about to have a seizure or you're about to have a migraine. Or for deep pressure therapy, you're starting to fidget, you're starting to bite your nails, and they're like, oh, she needs comfort. So you're not telling them, give me deep pressure therapy. The biting of the nails tells them to provide deep pressure therapy. And that's called the cue transfer. And you compare that environmental cue, which is nail biting, to deep pressure therapy. And we talk about that in the course as well. But if you want to research on your own, you can always look online and learn about cue transfers. Okay, so the third one is going to be generalize. So generalizing is making sure they can do it anywhere in various situations. So deep pressure therapy, for example, you want your dog to know that they can provide deep pressure therapy whether you're sitting on the ground or on the couch or on a bench. And then, of course, we're going to practice in a variety variety of locations as well, which kind of is part of generalizing, but I broke it off because you can generalize at home first and then bring it out in public to further generalize. So, phase 4, we have public access. So, we first try to pick dog friendly spots to ensure that our dogs are ready. So, at Home Depot is dog friendly. Generally, at least the Michaels around here, the craft store is dog friendly. So, we can feel comfortable knowing that they allow pet dogs anyway. So, that takes kind of the pressure off of us to make sure that our dogs are well behaved. And then, two, we want to move into service dog only spots that are easy to leave. So, a grocery store, you could easily leave. Third, when our dogs are ready, we can take them to places that are harder to leave. Like when you're eating a meal, it's a little bit harder to leave because you have to pay before you leave. Or if you're in class, it might be a little harder to leave. But that's why we don't do that until our dogs are ready. And I should also mention that you're able to read earlier stress signals so that you know when it's time to leave versus waiting until they're full blown stressed out. And then finally, we can start practicing in places that are actually just not possible to leave, like an airplane flight, because you can't leave an airplane flight. Last but not least, let's talk about how to start self-training your service dog. We talked a little bit about it in the phases as far as like you want to start at the foundations, but we're going to talk about like what to do right now. And so the first thing I'm going to say on the human side is you want to improve your dog training skills. So you want to make sure that you understand important training concepts like clicker training or marker training, the understand the what reinforcement versus punishment is, understand the nuances of it because not all reinforcement is the same. A lot of times people think reinforcement means treats. That's not necessarily always the case. And dogs find a lot of other things reinforcing as well as punishing as well. And that can be unique to each individual dog. The second one is clear timing and communication. So if you're using clicker training, you want to have that clear timing and click right when your dog does the behavior, which can take practice and coordination practice. You also want to make sure that you have a solid understanding of dog body language. I cannot explain enough how many people really don't understand subtle body language cues. Just like us, it's not just are you terrified or are you extremely happy? We have a lot of emotions in between, including feeling conflicted sometimes. For example, if your friends are pressuring you to go to a haunted house for Halloween and it's your employer and your boss is pressuring you, yes, that has happened to me. It doesn't mean you want to go. It means that if you go, you are kind of giving in to that social pressure, but you may still be very uncomfortable and terrified while you're there. So, obviously, if something is actually dangerous, you're probably not going to give in to social pressure, but you may, even if you're pretty nervous, right? So, our dogs can also sometimes feel nervous, but give in to social pressure, especially when you're out in public and they know that you want them to work and you want them to like loose leash walk the whole time. They can start to get stressed out. And you want to be able to notice those subtle cues so that you're not waiting until your dog just completely falls apart and it's embarrassing for you. Your dog is going to not like training. Um, obviously every dog is different, but it's not like one time is typically going to ruin your training. But you want to make sure that you are listening and watching your dog to be more successful in your training. You also want to know how to split criteria, which is a fancy way of just saying making a behavior easier or harder, or sorry, just easier. And so let's say I ask my dog to do deep pressure therapy, but they are afraid to step over my legs. If I want to split the criteria, I would just first make them approach my legs and click and reward for that. And that's going to help them gain the confidence to eventually step over my legs and then lay down on my legs. There's a lot of ways to split criteria as well. Like you could use a broomstick, not your legs, to have them start getting comfortable stepping over items. So, a lot of splitting criteria is just learning how to be creative and learning how to adjust what we call the 3Ds: distance, duration, and distraction, making those easier to help support your dog in learning. And then last but not least is going to be working on your own patience and emotional regulation. So noticing yourself, what are the subtle signs, and connecting with your body, truly like noticing when you're starting to get stressed out. Because just like our dogs, we want to catch it early so we can take a breath and take a break versus possibly lash out at our dogs or other people for no reason other than emotional dysregulation. So that's something I really encourage you to work with, obviously, a medical professional on. But you can also start to notice during in the training context, at what point do you need to take a break? I always say when you start to feel like there's a wall, like a block in your training, you need to just stop and reevaluate what is going wrong before you continue moving forward. We want training to be fun for both us and our dogs. Okay, so how should you start in general? So first, I want you to create a list, and I want you to practice getting your dog to focus in a variety of environments. So create a list of everything your dog struggles with focusing. So that could be a dog, kids running around, skateboards. So you want to create a list and then work on getting your dog's focus in those environments. And then two, make a plan. Write down your weekly and monthly training goals and journal what you worked on each day. And then check your progress. So, I really recommend, no matter how uncomfortable you feel, recording your training sessions because that's the only way you're going to start to know whether you're doing something wrong or not. And by rewatching yourself, you don't have to post this to social media, right? You can if you want to, but you don't have to. It's more for yourself so that you can see one, not only you have like a video journal of your progress with your dog, but also you might think that you have really good timing in the moment because your mind is focused on training your dog. But when you rewatch, you might notice your timing is off or you're doing this weird thing with your hands. So your dog is getting confused. So just keep that in mind. If you want a copy of my service dog training plan tracker, just go to the link that I've listed here. Keep in mind that capitalization does matter. I guess with Bitly, it does. So you have to make sure, like it's SD training, make sure SDT is capitalized and P in plan and T in tracker is capitalized. Otherwise, the link won't work.